At 16:47 hours on June 14, 1944, Private Leo Major crouched behind a hedgerow 400 meters south of Normandy and watched his squad leader's head disappear in a spray of red mist and bone fragments as a German 88mm shell hit the half-track at point-blank range. The explosion lifted the 9-ton vehicle 3 feet off the ground, flipped it sideways, and killed all 7 men inside in the time it took Major to blink. He was 23 years old, had been in Normandy for 8 days, and had just become the last living member of his reconnaissance patrol. The noise was incredible, not just loud but physically crushing, a pressure wave that knocked him flat and filled his sinuses with the smell of burning diesel and cooked meat. Through the smoke and hedgerow branches, he could see them. Panzer IV tanks, at least 6 in the vanguard, advancing in line formation down the farm road toward the crossroads at Normandy. Their tracks churned the muddy Norman earth into chocolate pudding. 25 tons of German steel moving at 12 kilometers per hour, turrets traversing left and right, searching for targets. Behind them, more tanks. Maybe a dozen, maybe more. Major couldn't get an exact count through the smoke, but the math was simple and terrible. If those panzers took the crossroads, they'd cut the main supply route to the British 3rd Division, trap 12,000 men against the Meuse River, and turn the entire left flank of the Normandy beachhead into a killing ground. The British had established a defensive line here 3 days ago, anchored on a single 17-pounder anti-tank gun dug into a hull-down position behind a destroyed barn. The gun was a monster, 3 tons of steel and springs, firing 17-pound armor-piercing shells at 3,000 feet per second, with enough kinetic energy to punch through 140 millimeters of armor at 1,000 yards. It was the only weapon in the British arsenal that could reliably kill a Panzer IV from the front. And right now, it was abandoned. The 6-man gun crew had evacuated 20 minutes ago when the German artillery barrage started, leaving the weapon behind because you didn't move a 3-ton gun under artillery fire. You just ran and hoped to come back later. Major had approximately 90 seconds before the lead panzer reached effective firing range of the crossroads. He had a Lee Enfield rifle with 4 rounds remaining, 1 phosphorus grenade, and absolutely no training on how to operate a 17-pounder anti-tank gun. What he did have was 4 years of experience fixing farm equipment on his family's dairy operation outside Montreal, a mechanical aptitude that had made him the unofficial repair specialist in his unit, and a very clear understanding that if he didn't do something extremely stupid in the next minute and a half, 12,000 British soldiers were going to die. He sprinted across 40 meters of open ground to the gun emplacement, diving into the sandbag pit as an 88mm shell screamed overhead and detonated in the hedgerow behind him. The 17-pounder sat there like an accusation, its barrel pointed uselessly at a 45-degree angle to the road, its breech mechanism open, 3 unfired shells stacked neatly beside the gun shield. Major had seen these weapons fired during training exercises. He knew the basic principle: load shell, close breech, traverse barrel to target, pull firing lanyard, repeat. Simple in theory, impossible in practice for one man. The 17-pounder required a 6-man crew because every operation was a 2-handed job that required coordination between multiple positions. The loader had to lift the 17-pound shell from the ready rack, ram it into the breech, and close the mechanism, a process that took 2 men 8 seconds when they were trained and rested. The gunner had to operate the traverse wheel to aim horizontally while simultaneously working the elevation wheel to adjust vertical angle, both hands occupied, eyes glued to the sight. The commander had to identify targets, call ranges, and order fire. 3 other crew members handled ammunition supply, spotting, and communication. You couldn't do all of that alone. The physics didn't work. You literally didn't have enough hands. Unless you improvised. Major examined the gun with a farmer's eye, looking for mechanical shortcuts. The traverse mechanism was a hand crank system connected to a worm gear that rotated the entire gun carriage. Standard military engineering, precise, reliable, and agonizingly slow. It took 14 complete rotations of the traverse wheel to swing the barrel 90 degrees. At one rotation, every 1.2 seconds, that meant 17 seconds to acquire a new target. Too slow. The Panzers would kill him before he could traverse to the second tank. But the gun sat on a circular bearing race, a steel ring that allowed the entire carriage to rotate. The traverse wheel engaged the bearing through a clutch mechanism. If Major could disengage the clutch, the gun would swing freely on the bearing race, much faster, but with zero precision. He'd have to aim by physically pushing the barrel, using the 3-ton gun's momentum and the bearing's friction to control the swing. Rough aiming, not precise targeting. Good enough for shooting at 25-ton targets at 400 meters. He found the clutch lever on the left side of the carriage, a spring-loaded handle that locked the traverse mechanism. He pulled it. The gun swung free on its bearing, suddenly mobile, the barrel drifting slightly as the carriage settled. Good. That solved traverse. Now he needed to solve the loading problem. The breech mechanism was a vertical sliding block that required 2 hands to operate, one to pull the operating handle, one to guide the shell into the chamber, then both hands to close and lock the mechanism. Major didn't have 2 hands. He had 2 hands total, and he needed them for aiming and firing. He needed a way to hold the breech open while he loaded, then close it remotely while his hands were on the traverse and elevation controls. In the destroyed barn behind the gun position, he found what he needed. A coil of baling wire, the kind farmers use to repair everything from fences to tractor parts. 20 feet of 12-gauge galvanized steel wire, tensile strength approximately 1,200 pounds. He cut 4 lengths with his combat knife, ran back to the gun, and started improvising a mechanical linkage that would have made his engineering instructors weep. He wired the breech operating handle to the elevation wheel using a simple lever system. When he cranked the elevation wheel clockwise, the wire pulled the breech handle down, opening the mechanism. When he cranked counterclockwise, the wire went slack, allowing the spring-loaded breech to slam shut and lock. It was crude, imprecise, and violated approximately 17 safety regulations. It also meant he could load and lock the breech with one hand, while his other hand stayed on the traverse control. The firing mechanism was easier. The 17-pounder used a pull-cord lanyard that triggered the firing pin when yanked. Major tied the lanyard to his belt with a length of wire, creating a hands-free trigger he could activate by leaning backward. Pull the cord with body weight, gun fires, return to neutral position, repeat. Simple. Stupid. Potentially fatal if he mistimed it. He loaded the first shell at 16:53 hours, 6 minutes after his squad leader died. The shell was a 17-pound armor-piercing round with a tungsten carbide penetrator tip, designed to punch through hardened steel at supersonic velocity. He lifted it from the ready rack. God, it was heavy, a solid cylinder of high explosive and metal that weighed as much as a car tire, and slid it into the breech chamber. The fit was tight, requiring a firm shove to seat it properly. He cranked the elevation wheel counterclockwise.
The wire linkage pulled.
The breech block slammed shut with a metallic clang that echoed off the barn ruins. Locked and loaded. The lead Panzer was 380 meters away, closing at 12 kilometers per hour. Major had maybe 90 seconds before it reached optimal firing position. He grabbed the barrel with both hands and shoved, swinging the 3-ton gun on its bearing race, feeling the momentum build as the carriage rotated. The barrel swung past the target, too far. He pulled back, fighting the momentum, trying to stop the rotation at the exact moment the crosshairs aligned with the Panzer's frontal armor. The gun settled. Close enough. He dropped to the gunner's seat, pressed his eye against the sight, made fine adjustments with the elevation wheel. The Panzer filled the sight picture, 370 meters, moving right to left at walking speed. He had to lead the target, aim ahead of its current position to account for the shell's 0.12-second flight time and the tank's forward movement. Basic physics. He'd done this exact calculation hundreds of times, shooting ducks on his family's farm. A duck at 40 yards, moving at 60 kilometers per hour, required a lead of 18 inches. A tank at 370 meters, moving at 12 kilometers per hour, required a lead of approximately 1.2 meters. He adjusted the sight, settling the crosshairs on empty air 2 meters ahead of the Panzer's bow. This was the moment where he'd find out if his improvised firing mechanism worked, or if it would blow up in his face. He leaned back, felt the wire lanyard pulled tight against his belt. The gun fired with a sound like the entire world breaking in half. The recoil was biblical. The 17-pounder kicked backward with 47,000 foot-pounds of energy, slamming into its recoil mechanism, compressing the hydraulic buffers, and nearly throwing Major out of the gunner's seat. The muzzle blast created a concussive wave that knocked leaves off trees 30 meters away. A cone of fire erupted from the barrel, illuminating the gun pit in orange light. And 370 meters downrange, the armor-piercing shell hit the Panzer IV exactly 0.3 meters behind the driver's vision port, penetrated 80 millimeters of frontal armor like it was wet cardboard, and detonated inside the crew compartment with catastrophic results. The Panzer stopped moving. Smoke poured from every hatch and vision slit. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, the ammunition cooked off. A secondary explosion that blew the turret 15 feet into the air and turned the tank into a crematorium for 5 German soldiers who never knew what hit them. Major didn't have time to celebrate. The other Panzers had seen the muzzle flash, identified his position, were already traversing their turrets toward him. He had maybe 5 seconds before they fired. He needed to reload, re-aim, and kill another tank before the Germans turned his gun position into a crater. He cranked the elevation wheel clockwise. The wire linkage pulled the breech operating handle. The breech block slid open. The spent shell casing ejected with a clatter. He grabbed the second shell, loaded it, cranked counterclockwise, felt the breech slam shut. The entire reload sequence took 11 seconds. Too slow. He needed 8 seconds maximum, or the math would catch up with him. The second Panzer was already firing. The 75mm shell hit the barn wall 6 meters to Major's left, punched through the stone, and detonated inside with a sound like a train crash. Shrapnel whistled overhead. Dust filled the air. Major swung the gun toward the second tank, using pure momentum and muscle memory, fighting the carriage's inertia. The barrels swept across the target zone, too fast, swung back, settled. He pressed his eye to the sight. 420 meters. Moving, leading the target. Fire. The second Panzer died exactly like the first. Penetration, internal detonation, secondary explosion, turret separation. 2 tanks dead in 40 seconds. 21 to go. And now, Major understood the real problem. This wasn't about mechanical skill or improvised engineering. This was about mathematics, endurance, and time. 9 hours. That's how long he'd have to hold this position alone, operating a weapon designed for 6 men, fighting an enemy that outnumbered him 23 to 1. 9 hours of loading 17-pound shells, aiming a 3-ton gun, absorbing recoil that could break bones, all while German tanks systematically tried to kill him. The physics were brutal, the odds were impossible. But somewhere behind him, 12,000 British soldiers were counting on this crossroads staying open. And Leo Major, a 23-year-old farmer from Montreal who'd fixed more tractors than he'd fired rifle rounds, was about to find out exactly how much punishment a human body could absorb before it quit. The 3rd Panzer was accelerating toward his position, turret traversing, main gun elevating. Major reached for the 3rd shell and discovered his hands were shaking. Major's hands steadied the moment he gripped the 3rd shell. Muscle memory overrode fear. 4 years of lifting hay bales and engine blocks had trained his body to work when his brain wanted to shut down. The 17-pound shell slid into the breach with the same motion he'd used 10,000 times loading grain sacks onto his father's truck. Mechanical, automatic. The kind of work your body could do while your conscious mind handled the geometry of staying alive. The 3rd Panzer was 390 meters out, moving faster now, the commander having realized that speed was survival against an anti-tank gun. 18 kilometers per hour, tracks throwing mud, bow machine gun chattering uselessly at the sandbag position. Major swung the gun barrel with both hands, feeling the carriage pivot on its bearing race, the 3-ton mass responding to his push like a wheelbarrow. Heavy, but controllable if you understood momentum. The crosshairs settled on target. He compensated for the increased speed, leading the Panzer by 1.8 meters instead of 1.2. Physics didn't care about fear. Physics just required correct calculations. He leaned back. The wire lanyard pulled tight. The gun fired. This time he was braced for the recoil, legs locked against the gun shield, spine pressed into the seat. The 17-pounder still tried to throw him backward, but he rode it like a bronco, staying in position, eyes already searching for the 4th target before the 3rd Panzer's ammunition finished cooking off. Reload time, 9 seconds. Etta. Still not fast enough. He needed to find 2 more seconds somewhere, or the Germans would eventually saturate his position with enough 75mm shells to collapse the barn ruins on top of him. The 4th and 5th Panzers were working together now, a tactical evolution that made Major's stomach clench. One tank would advance, while the other provided covering fire, leapfrogging forward in 50-meter bounds, never giving him a stationary target for more than a few seconds. Smart, coordinated, the kind of combined arms tactics that required training and discipline. These weren't green conscripts. These were veterans who'd been killing Allied tanks since 1940 and knew exactly how to approach a dug-in anti-tank position. Major fired at the advancing Panzer, leading it by what felt right. the mathematics happening in some part of his brain that bypassed conscious thought. The shell hit low, striking the left track assembly instead of the hull armor. The track exploded in a spray of steel links and rubber pads. The Panzer slewed sideways, immobilized but not destroyed. The crew would survive. He didn't have time to feel bad about it. The 5th Panzer used the disabled tank as cover, advancing behind it, using the wreck to shield its approach. Clever. Major reloaded. 8 seconds this time, he was getting faster, and waited. Patient. The Panzer commander would have to expose his tank eventually to get a firing angle.
It was pure physics.
You couldn't shoot through 25 tons of disabled friendly armor. You had to come around. And when you came around, you'd be in Major's kill zone for exactly 2.3 seconds before your turret could traverse to target him. The Panzer emerged from behind the wreck at 17:04 hours, 17 minutes into the battle. Major fired the instant he saw the bow. The shell caught the tank in the side armor, 60 millimeters thick instead of the 80 millimeter frontal protection. Penetration. Detonation. Another turret flying through the air like a discarded toy. 4 tanks destroyed, 1 disabled. 18 to go. His shoulders were screaming now, the muscles burning from the repeated recoil impacts. Each shot transferred 47,000 foot-pounds of energy through the gun carriage into his body. It was like getting hit by a professional boxer every 40 seconds. His right shoulder would be purple and black tomorrow, if he lived to see tomorrow. The noise was doing something terrible to his hearing. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine that wouldn't stop. Every explosion sounded muffled and distant, like it was happening underwater. The German tanks had learned. They weren't advancing in line formation anymore. They'd spread out, using the Norman hedgerows for concealment, approaching from multiple angles simultaneously. Major could see at least 6 Panzers now, moving through the agricultural maze at different speeds, trying to overwhelm his ability to engage multiple targets. If 3 tanks reached firing positions at the same time, he was dead. Simple mathematics. He could only shoot one direction at a time. He chose the closest threat, a Panzer IV approaching from 11 o'clock, 340 meters, moving between hedgerows. Loaded, aimed, fired. Miss. The shell sailed over the tank's turret by half a meter, his elevation calculation wrong, fatigue making him sloppy. The Panzer's commander saw the muzzle flash, immediately reversed direction, backing into the hedgerow for cover. Smart. Now Major had lost visual on that tank and had to acquire a new target, while the hidden Panzer repositioned for a flanking shot. A second Panzer appeared at 2 o'clock, 410 meters. Major swung the gun right, the barrels sweeping across 60 degrees of arc, his arms trembling with effort. Loaded. Aimed. Fired. Hit. The Panzer brewed up, its fuel tanks rupturing, diesel igniting in a black smoke column that rose 40 meters into the overcast Norman sky. 5 destroyed, 1 damaged, 1 hiding, 11 visible and maneuvering. At 17:18 hours, 31 minutes into the engagement, Major discovered a problem he hadn't anticipated. He was running out of ammunition. The ready rack beside the gun held 12 shells. He'd fired 7, missed once, had 5 remaining. Behind the gun position, there was a secondary ammunition storage dugout with another 30 shells, but it was 15 meters away through open ground. Getting to it meant leaving the gun. Leaving the gun meant the Panzers would advance unchecked. Not leaving the gun meant running dry after 5 more shots. He made a calculation that would have seemed insane to anyone who hadn't spent their childhood doing emergency repairs during harvest season, when a broken thresher meant losing an entire wheat crop. Between shots, during the reload sequence, he had approximately 11 seconds of dead time before he could fire again. The ammunition dugout was 15 meters away. He could sprint 100 meters in 14 seconds. That meant he could theoretically run to the dugout, grab shells, and return in 4.2 seconds if he moved at maximum speed. It was completely impossible. It was also the only option. He fired his 8th shot. Another Panzer destroyed at 450 meters, penetration through the turret ring, catastrophic ammunition detonation. Then he did something that violated every tactical doctrine ever written. He abandoned his weapon in the middle of a firefight. The sprint to the ammunition dugout happened in a blur of adrenaline and terror. His boots slipped on mud. A 75mm shell hit the barn wall, showering him with stone fragments that stung like hornets. He dove into the dugout, grabbed 4 shells, all he could carry, and sprinted back. Total time, 8 seconds. Too long. A Panzer had advanced 32 meters during his absence, but he was back at the gun, loading, firing, killing, the rhythm continuing. He repeated this suicidal ammunition run 6 more times over the next hour. Each time, the Panzers advanced a little further. Each time, he returned to find enemy tanks closer to his position. But each time, he killed another tank before they could exploit his absence. The mathematics were holding. Barely. By 18:23 hours, 2 hours and 6 minutes into the battle, Major had destroyed 11 Panzers and disabled 2 more. His improvised wire firing mechanism had broken twice, forcing him to repair it under fire using spare wire and his combat knife. The gun's recoil buffer was leaking hydraulic fluid, reducing the mechanism's effectiveness, making each shot slam harder into his shoulder. His right arm was numb from fingertips to shoulder blade. He was drinking water from his canteen between shots to avoid passing out from dehydration. The Germans had changed tactics again. They'd stopped trying to assault his position directly. Instead, they were setting up a siege, positioning tanks in a semicircle at maximum range, 800 to 1,000 meters, where their 75mm guns could fire with relative safety, while his 17-pounder's accuracy degraded significantly at those distances. They were going to pound his position into rubble with sustained indirect fire, while preventing him from relocating or withdrawing. Major counted 13 Panzers still operational. He'd killed 11, disabled 2, and somewhere out there in the Norman countryside, 13 more tanks were preparing to reduce his position to a smoking crater. He had 17 shells remaining. The mathematics were finally turning against him. Then, the weather changed everything. At 18:47 hours, the overcast Norman sky opened up and dumped rain in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to 200 meters. The Panzers disappeared into the gray wall of water. Their long-range bombardment became guesswork, shells landing randomly across the field, nowhere near Major's position. For the first time in over 2 hours, he could stop shooting and assess the damage to his body. His shoulder was destroyed. Not broken, he could still move it. But the soft tissue damage was severe enough that lifting his right arm above horizontal felt like knives in the joint. His hearing was gone in his right ear, just a constant, high-pitched tone. His hands were blistered from the elevation and traverse wheels, skin torn off in sheets where he'd gripped too hard during recoil. He was shaking from adrenaline come-down, his body finally acknowledging the sustained trauma it had endured. The rain lasted 43 minutes. During that time, Major performed field maintenance on the gun that should have required a 3-man armorer team and a fully equipped workshop. He repacked the recoil buffer with grease scavenged from a destroyed German half-track. He replaced his broken wire firing mechanism with a new linkage that was actually more reliable than the first version. He moved ammunition forward from the dugout, building a ready stack of 20 shells within arm's reach. He ate a tin of beef from his pack and drank a full liter of water. And he watched the grey rain wall, waiting for the Panzers to emerge. They came out of the rain at 19:33 hours in a coordinated assault that should have killed him in the first 30 seconds. 6 tanks advancing simultaneously from different angles, converging on his position at maximum speed. Turrets firing on the move. Saturation tactics designed to overwhelm a single gun through sheer volume of fire. The mathematics were brutal. 6 targets, 6 different ranges, 6 different lead calculations. He needed to kill all 6 tanks in under 90 seconds, or they'd reach close range, where their armor would be too thick for his firing angle. He killed the first tank at 520 meters, loaded, aimed, fired. 9 seconds. Second tank at 480 meters, approaching from 10 o'clock. Swing the gun. Aim, fire. 8 seconds. Third tank at 440 meters, the gun's recoil buffer failing, the impact slamming his shoulder so hard he tasted blood. 7 seconds. Fourth tank at 390 meters, his hands moving automatically now, no conscious thought, just repetition and muscle memory. 7 seconds. Fifth tank at 350 meters, dangerously close, its 75mm gun elevated directly at his position. 6 seconds. Fire. The 5th Panzer's shell and Major's 17-pounder round passed each other in flight. The German's 75mm hit the sandbag wall 3 feet to Major's left, detonated, and buried him in an avalanche of sand, dirt, and concussive force. His improvised wire firing mechanism snapped. The gun's sight was knocked out of alignment. And the 6th Panzer was 280 meters away, closing fast, its commander certain he'd just killed the anti-tank position. Major cleared the sand from his face, saw the approaching tank through vision that wouldn't focus properly, and did something that proved he'd completely lost his mind. He aimed the 17-pounder without using the sight. Pure Kentucky windage, using the barrel's physical orientation and his memory of the gun's trajectory. He cranked the elevation wheel to what felt right, shoved the barrel with both hands until it pointed at approximately the right spot, loaded a shell, and yanked the firing lanyard manually because his belt-mounted trigger system was buried under a ton of sand. The shot was impossible. The shell hit the 6th Panzer in the engine deck at a 35-degree deflection angle, ricocheted off the armor, and should have sailed harmlessly into the Norman countryside. Instead, it struck the tank's externally mounted spare track links, fragmented into dozens of high-velocity pieces, and shredded the engine compartment's cooling system. The Panzer hemorrhaged coolant, overheated, and cooked off its own ammunition, without Major's shell ever penetrating the primary armor. Pure luck, completely unrepeatable. 6 tanks dead in 52 seconds. 7 Panzers remained. Major had 11 shells left. His gun was damaged, his firing mechanism destroyed, his shoulder possibly fractured, and his sight alignment was somewhere between wrong and catastrophically inaccurate. The British defensive line was still 3 kilometers behind him. The crossroads was still critical, and he still had 7 more tanks to kill before the mathematics allowed him to stop. The last 7 Panzers tried everything. They tried massed fire, 5 tanks shooting simultaneously at his position, turning the barn ruins into a moonscape. Major survived by abandoning the gun during the bombardment, sheltering in the ammunition dugout, then sprinting back when the firing stopped. They tried infiltration, 1 Panzer attempting to approach through a drainage ditch at 50 meters range. Major killed it with a shell, fired at near horizontal angle, the round skipping across the ground like a stone on water before punching through the tank's thin belly armor. They tried waiting him out, positioning at extreme range and maintaining covering fire for 90 minutes, trying to force him to abandon his position or run out of ammunition. None of it worked. Major was operating in a state beyond fatigue, beyond fear, beyond rational thought. He was a machine that loaded shells and killed tanks. Each shot was the only shot. Each reload was the last reload. Time stopped having meaning. The battle became a series of discrete moments. Load, aim, fire, reload. Load, aim, fire, reload. The rhythm of it was almost meditative. At 22:47 hours, 5 hours and 31 minutes after the engagement began, Major killed the 23rd and final Panzer. The tank was 680 meters away, attempting to withdraw after watching 22 others die to a single gun position that should have been overrun in the first 10 minutes. Major's shot hit it in the rear armor, the weakest point, penetrated the engine compartment and set the fuel tanks ablaze. The crew bailed out, running across the fields into the darkness. He didn't fire on them. The battle was over. He sat behind the 17-pounder for another hour, waiting to see if more tanks would come. None did. At 23:54 hours, a British patrol from the 3rd Division arrived at the crossroads, having advanced through terrain the Germans had abandoned. They found Private Leo Major sitting beside a damaged anti-tank gun, surrounded by 23 burning Panzers scattered across 2 square kilometers of Norman farmland. The patrol lieutenant's name was Richard Thornton. He was 26 years old, had commanded a rifle platoon through 8 days of continuous combat since D-Day, and had seen enough of war to recognize impossible things when they happened. He walked through the gun position, examining the improvised wire mechanisms, the scattered shell casings, the blood on the gunner's seat, trying to understand how one man had done this. "How many crew?" Thornton asked. "1," Major said. His voice was hoarse from breathing powder smoke and shouting over artillery. "How many shells?" "Started with 42, got 6 left." Thornton looked at the burning tanks, did the mathematics in his head, looked at Major, looked at the gun, looked at the tanks again. "That's impossible." "Seemed necessary at the time," Major said. The British 3rd Division's after-action report, filed June 16, 1944, documented the engagement at Normandy as unprecedented anti-tank action by single gun position. The report credited the successful defense of the crossroads with preventing German counterattack that would have isolated 12,000 British troops and potentially collapsed the entire left flank of the Normandy beachhead. Estimated lives saved: between 4,000 and 8,000 soldiers who would have been killed or captured if the German armor had broken through. The report also noted that the gun position had been operated by a single Canadian private using field expedient modifications to standard crew-served weapon. Military intelligence requested detailed information about these modifications for potential doctrine revision. Major's improvised wire firing mechanism was photographed, documented, and classified. The design principles eventually influenced the development of semi-automatic loading systems in later anti-tank weapons. Major received the Distinguished Conduct Medal for the action, the second highest decoration for gallantry available to Commonwealth enlisted personnel. The citation read, "For exceptional courage and resourcefulness in the face of overwhelming enemy armor, maintaining fire from a crew-served weapon while operating alone, destroying 23 enemy tanks, and preserving a critical defensive position." He received the medal on June 24, 1944, from Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who reportedly asked him how he'd managed to operate a 17-pounder alone. Major's answer was characteristically brief: baling wire and stubbornness. The physical cost of the engagement became apparent over the following weeks. Major's right shoulder required 8 weeks of physical therapy to regain full range of motion. The soft tissue damage was severe enough that he couldn't lift his rifle above his head for 3 months. His hearing never fully recovered in his right ear, leaving him with permanent tinnitus and 40% hearing loss. The repeated recoil trauma had compressed 3 vertebrae in his spine, causing chronic back pain that would persist for the rest of his life. He returned to active duty in August 1944 and continued serving with the Canadian Forces through the liberation of Belgium and the Netherlands. In April 1945, he participated in the liberation of the Dutch city of Zwolle, an action that earned him a second Distinguished Conduct Medal and cemented his reputation as one of the most decorated Canadian soldiers of the war. But the Normandy engagement remained his most significant tactical contribution. The day one farm boy with improvised wire mechanisms had held a crossroads against an armored battalion. The 17-pounder gun that Major used was recovered after the battle, repaired, and returned to service. It participated in 12 more engagements before the war ended, operated by standard 6-man crews who achieved an average kill rate of 1.3 enemy tanks per engagement. Major's single-handed 9-hour defense had a kill rate of 2.56 tanks per hour. No other anti-tank gun in the European theater, before or after, matched that performance. Post-war analysis of the Normandy engagement by military historians identified several factors that contributed to Major's success. The German armor was operating without infantry support, a tactical error that left them vulnerable to a well-positioned anti-tank gun. The terrain favored the defender, with hedgerows limiting German maneuver options. The 17-pounder's superior armor penetration gave Major a significant technological advantage. But none of those factors explained how one man had physically operated a weapon designed for 6 people, sustained the punishment of 36 main gun firings, and maintained tactical effectiveness for over 9 hours of continuous combat. The answer, as Major explained in a 1978 interview with Canadian military historians, was simple. "I grew up fixing tractors. A 17-pounder is just a really expensive tractor with a bigger kick. You figure out what needs to happen, you make it happen with whatever you have. Wire worked fine." The baling wire firing mechanism that Major improvised became the subject of a 1947 engineering study by the British War Office. The study concluded that while the design was crude and potentially hazardous, it demonstrated principles that could be applied to reducing crew requirements for heavy weapons. Several design elements from Major's improvisation appeared in post-war anti-tank gun development, though he received no royalties or recognition for the contribution. Major died in 2008 at age 87 in Montreal, survived by his wife and 3 children. His obituary in the Globe and Mail mentioned his Distinguished Conduct Medals and his role in liberating Zwolle, but failed to mention Normandy. The battle had been classified for 30 years due to the involvement of experimental anti-tank tactics, and by the time the files were declassified in 1974, it had been largely forgotten except by military historians and veterans of the 3rd Division. In 2019, a Canadian military historian named Michael Peterson published a comprehensive study of the Normandy engagement titled "One Man, One Gun: The Physics of Impossible Defense." Peterson's research identified the precise mechanical principles Major had used, calculated the actual physical forces involved, and concluded that the engagement represented the maximum theoretical performance of a single operator using improvised mechanisms on a crew-served weapon. The study estimated that Major had absorbed approximately 1.69 million foot-pounds of recoil energy over 9 hours, equivalent to being hit by a professional heavyweight boxer 360 times consecutively. The crossroads at Normandy still exists.
The barn ruins were cleared in 1946.
The gun position was filled in and converted to agricultural use. There's no monument, no marker, no indication that 23 tanks died there in 9 hours. Because a farm boy from Montreal understood mechanical physics and refused to abandon his position. The field grows wheat now. Sometimes farmers plowing the soil find pieces of steel track links or shell fragments and wonder what happened here. What happened was simple mathematics. 1 man, 1 gun, 36 shells fired, 23 tanks destroyed, 9 hours of sustained combat, and 12,000 British soldiers who lived because Leo Major knew how to fix things with baling wire and refused to accept that impossible meant anything more than slightly difficult.